My number 4
Yes.
is In Search of Greatness. Green, enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may cast a permanent spell from your hand with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the highest converted mana cost among other permanents you control without paying its mana cost. If you don't, scry 1. It's interesting that this card and Pyre of Heroes are both in the same set. They have similar, like, 2-drops that have this, like, +1 engine-y sort of feeling to them. Obviously, one, I think, is better than the other, but In Search of Greatness, I think, is just an interesting card. It has great art, also.
Oh, the art's
really,
amazing.
Cool.
So
really
we have
cool
discussed. I don't remember if it was in the pre-show or if it was off camera.
It was off camera.
You cannot put Mirror Superior into play with this, which is a
No.
travesty.
You can't. And now that I'm realizing that, I think I'm going to take this off my list, actually.
So, yeah, I had this on my list, and then me and Michael pre-show were talking about it, and then we realized that it is not one more or less. It is exactly one more than the largest permanent type you have. So it's just like, on one hand, on turn 3, you will get to cast a 3-drop for free. Right? Like that's the goal here. And if that's what you're trying to do, and if there's a Mere Superior but 3 mana, like what's the 5/6 flying that needs zombies to be exiled?
You can Scab Ruinator
at this point.
Fire Superior. That's the new Mirror Superior. We've done it.
They used to both be. They were both in the Vial version of the deck that I played years ago with Mare of Averbrook. So
that's what took it off the list. By the way, is that Vial exists, and I don't think this pairs well with Vial, and I would play Vial over it most of the time. Like
where you are missing the big payoff of In Search of Greatness. In my search for greatness, I discovered that delve creatures are the key to this card being sweet. So like I can like basically, because of Modern's shenanigans with fetch lands and all kinds of, the way that you can get like an angler down so fast. If I just like cast angler on turn 3 and then on turn 4 I get like an 8-drop from my hand for free. That's like really beefy. There's like so much power now you just get in Modern. Now granted, if they kill my angler before that happens, so be it. I've like put a lot of energy into this happening.
You do always get to scry. So if you're playing some clunky 5-drop with some clunky 8-drop or whatever, you like get to scry. So if you don't have the angler, you can scry it to the bottom. If you do have the angler, you can like scry to try and find it. Like that is relevant if you're playing this as a combo card.
Well, also if you're playing multiple delve creatures for the purpose of handling this, and one of them is Tasigur and one of them is angler. Tasigur can always cast angler for free if you have Tasigur in play when you've already exhausted your delve graveyard. And then if you do have Gristlebrand or you do have something else really sweet that is like harder to cast. So I think there's interesting stuff here. This is not that different from like a lot of those like Eldritch Evolution Neoform style cards. They all kind of similarly interact with each other. Those ones search, obviously. This one just from your hand, but I still think this card's really cool, and I think it has mad potential. So I wanted to put it high because it's cheap. See, it's green. Like there's a lot you can do with this card.
That makes sense. It is kind of like a proactive Neoform. It doesn't search your deck, so in that way it's worse. But it like you play it out and you scry. And then, like, eventually you get there.
Also, just like turn 2 In Search of Greatness, turn 3, I get 2 3-drops because I play one and I get the other one for free, is like what Collected Company essentially really wants to be doing the turn that you play Collected Company. Now, granted, you're getting them out of your deck as opposed to both out of your hand. So that's where like you suffer the most. But you're accelerating it a 6 mana worth of value on turn 3 very easily.
I think this is just another piece in the Satesian Champion Enchantress 3-drop deck, because getting that into play and then you get to play an enchant, you get to like O-ring their thing and draw a card, and now you have a 2/4 and you got this thing in there that's gonna get you a 4-drop, probably the other Enchantress draw a card, and then you're drawing lots of cards. It just keeps escalating. So many cards.
Yeah, this is not on my list, and I wouldn't put it there after this discussion, but it's definitely cuter than I thought, having had this.
It's dropped down significantly lower on my list than I thought it was when I put it on there. So that's my number 4 in Search of Greatness. Michael, what's your number 4?
My number 4 is Realmwalker. It is a 2 and a green creature shapeshifter 2/3, has Changeling. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. You may look at the top card of your library, and at any time you may cast creature spells of the chosen type from the top of your library. Another tribal card, plays well in an elf deck. Allows you to grind, digs for combo pieces. It is Collected Companyable. It is tutorable with all of your favorite tutors. It has the relevant creature types, so you get an elf off your Elvish War Master. Your Elvish Archer taps for a mana. You can tap it for a mana with your Heritage Druid. Elves is an obvious place for it. I think it could get played in like Spirits or Blue-Green Merfolk or whatever green tribal deck you've got. I think the rate on this is good enough, and it like is an effect that sometimes tribal decks are struggling for because it draws cards. I think it's pretty clear-cut option for many a tribal deck.
It's funny. Alex and I talked about this card at length on our like preview episode, like when spoilers a few weeks ago. We had a whole conversation about this card, and I was pretty convinced of everything that you are saying. Like at the time, I like kind of agreed. I think I said exactly those same decks. Looking at it, the more I think now, the less I think that this card is going to work in a tribal deck in Modern. And I think the reason is because I don't think that 3 mana that you need to untap with to have like a lot of value off the top in a creature deck is necessarily what a lot of the decks want. Maybe Blue-Green Merfolk is the one that feels the most significant, but even that's competing with other 3-drops. Like that's most powerful if you have Mara Regery, which is just another 3-drop that you already have to have.
Well, I think being able to hit this off of Collected Company or being able to tutor for it with Fort of Calling and stuff makes it a lot more appealing. And also, like, Elves, for example, you're making a ton of mana anyway. Like, you have mana to spend, you need cards.
It's a good card, for sure. It just seemed a little less exciting than I thought. It felt like it would end up taking up a slot that was important in most of the decks that it's in that I think would be better served with like the velocity that deck wanted. But you're probably right. I for some reason I got cold feet on Realmwalker and decided to put In Search for Greatness instead.
I think card's really sweet. I agree that like I think in Elves it's at its best. I think the ability that deck makes so much mana that it like being able to cast every card off the top that's not a land is like going to be very valuable. It's a 3-drop, and it's another 3-drop elf that is good, and that deck has a lot of those that it has as options. Yes. This does do something.
Collected Company decks do like to play 3-drops.
That is true.
I've heard.
And it is different enough from other ones that it offers a weakness of the deck, which is like the top of my deck is not in my hand. so I do like that about it. I think it's good. I think it's a good card.
Yeah, I don't know that it's like staple. 4 of an Elves, 4 of an Spirits. Merfolk is going to be blue-green 100% of the time, and they're going to play 4. Like, I don't think it's that good, but I do think like you're at least going to be thinking about it for all those decks, and I do think it's going to get played like at least as a tutor target.
The more tutoring that you can do for this card, the more likely it is to see play in a deck, just because like its ability to do that.
3 mana is like a very good rate for your future sight, and the fact that this has relevant creature types for whatever your tribal deck is, so it gets pumped by your Supreme Phantom, or it gets
Spirit token. Spirits take advantage of it, or
it taps for mana with your Heritage Druid. Like the fact that it does all those things and is just like a very aggressive rate for a future sight, I think is strong.
My number 5 is Magda. Whenever a dwarf you control becomes tapped, create a treasure token. Sacrifice 5 treasures, search your library for an artifact or dragon card, and put that card on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. It is a 2/1 for 1 and a red, and other dwarves you control get +1/+0. I think that this is a little bit of a future pull, and there is enough of the pieces that exist out there right now that make it fine, but both treasures and dwarves are things that they are going to keep printing good versions of, especially treasures. They have committed to treasures in ways that I didn't think they would even, and Magda is going to be better with every card that has the word treasure on it that is printed, including your dragon friend, and then add the layer that dwarf is a creature type that is popular, is like very fantasy driven, and it does have like playable dwarves, right? Like if you go to Kaladesh, there's the 1-drop artifact one that's a 3/1 for 1.
Toolcraft Exemplar.
That dude who's like this.
Yes.
He's like,
But specifically, being able to cheat any artifact in your graveyard, in your deck, into play for 5 mana, ostensibly, but like 5 mana that you can earn not through playing lands, but through cards that create those mana in the way that treasures are created is like.
I ended up putting this card on my honorable mentions list instead, and the big reason is because when I looked at this card, the first thing that came to mind for me was Dockside Extortionist, and I was like, oh yeah, that's like insane. But then I was like, you can't play that in Modern, and like Dockside's already just insane. Like that card's already so good. And what
it also
you're doing
wouldn't be good in Modern because your opponent wouldn't control as many artifacts.
Right.
They do in Commander.
So then I was like, Magda probably has to work pretty hard and be in a certain kind, like a deck that wants to plus your dwarves and be attacking. I don't know if that's necessarily a deck that has like, I mean, I love the flavor, by the way, of like the dwarves having their gold and like trading all of their gold for like Smaug, basically. That's like extremely sick. And I just like imagining this card and just having Benedict Cumberbatch like narrate this card. But that being said, I think that this card's really cool. There's probably a combo deck that'll eventually get built with it, but it just felt like a lot of work maybe in a deck that wouldn't want to do that work for that payoff, at least the way I see it right now.
Well, like the payoffs are all right now a lot of dwarves are artificers, right? So like even the small side of this payoff where you're not just like you just have one good artifact target that you can tutor into play, but you can play cards that are just like fine if you have to. That like if you draw them, they're not bad cards. And then the fact that to me, like 2-mana lords are always something to look at, right? Like 2 mana +1/+0 to a tribe that has not seen a lot of printings, but is like on a short list of very easy to see wizards printing a lot more of moving forward. And especially now that they're back and people responded to them so positively, I just think like that added to a layer that there is just a I win the game button attached to this card, because at instant speed on the end of your opponent's turn, you can sneak in a Blightsteel Colossus is like not a thing to laugh at a 2/1. That also is a 2/1 that just every time it taps, you make a treasure token.
So that is your number. That's your number 4,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Okay, so I wonder of our top 3, because I don't think one of my 3 is on your top 3s, but I will go with my. All right, I'll go with my number 3 because I'll go with my number 3 is Valky, God of Lies. 1 black, 1 colorless, 2/1 legendary creature god. When Valky enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card they revealed this way until Valky leaves the battlefield. For colorless X, choose a creature card exiled with Valky with converted mana cost X. Valky becomes a copy of that card, and then it flips. Valky flips into a 7 mana planeswalker.
It doesn't flip. You can cast it as a 7.
Oh, sure. Yeah, now that I'm rereading this card, this should have been higher in my list. 5 loyalty. It flips into Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter. As Tybalt enters the battlefield, you get an emblem with you may play exiled cards with Tybalt, Cosmic Imposter, and you pay spend mana as the worst mana of any color to cast those spells. +2, exile the top card of each player's library. -3, exile target artifact or creature. -8, exile all cards from all graveyards. Add red, red, red. This should be my number. But it's not. It's my number 3, and I stand by it.
Can't wait to hear 2 and 1. I think I'm going to like them.
I have opinions on this card. I'm going to save it for when I say it in 1 and/or 2 cards that isn't this card. Do we want to wait for number 1 and have the Valky conversation then, or do we want to have it now in the middle?
We could wait to have the full conversation about Valky. But I'll give. Why don't I do this? Yep. I'll give like a couple points about this card that I think are sweet.
Okay.
And then you guys don't need to respond to it. We can get moving when it gets to you. We can all have the pile on conversation.
Okay.
I mean, the thing that right on the front of this card that is just like the thing is that this just takes Uro out of their hand, and then for 3 just becomes Uro, which like that's the sickest thing that this card probably does, because Uro is one of the most powerful creatures ever printed. So like, it's just a pretty bonkers. You just cast this, take it out of their hand, make this Uro, and then attack, and like just value. But like Brain Maggot and cards like that are bad for the most part. Like this is for each opponent. Like they didn't even tone it down. It's a commander state. It's commander also. It's so good. And then the big thing, the thing that I always talk about is like the scalability of cards, right? Like is it good early, is it good late? And the fact that this thing is the best version of this rate basically on a creature printed at 2, but it's also a 7 mana planeswalker at the same time is just bonkers. So you're not supposed to get a 7 mana planeswalker for the rate of the best Brain Maggot ever printed, or Sculler, or whatever other cards are. So all those things, I think those are the face value things. Those are my Valky thoughts. I'll save that for the rest of what you guys have to say once it rounds back to you.
There's more to be said. There is more to be said.
I will say that I'm hyped that Tybalt is like the best card in a set in an era when every set prints some of the best cards ever printed, after being the worst for so long. Michael, it is your turn to say your number 3.
My number 3 is Halvar, God of Battle.
Really?
He is. Oh yes. Well, happens to be a mono white deck already playable in Modern that's very interested in this effect. All right, let me continue. It is a 2 white 4/4 legendary creature god. Creatures you control that are enchanted or equipped have double strike. At the beginning of each combat, you may attach target aura or equipment attached to a creature you control to target creature you control, and then it has an alternate card you can cast, Sword of the Realms, 1 and a white. Equipped creature has +2/+0 and has vigilance. Whenever equipped creature dies, return it to its owner's hand. Costs 1 and a white to equip. So this card goes into the Hammer Time decks, as they are often known, which, for those of you who do not know, it is a very popular, very successful Modern deck that is often mono white, sometimes splashing colors for interaction or whatever, since white does not do that very well. But it's playing Colossus Hammer, with Sigarda's Aid, which Sigarda's Aid is a 1-mana enchantment. You may cast R and equipment spells as though they had flash. Whenever an equipment enters a battlefield under your control, you may attach it to target creature you control. It also plays 4 Pure Steel Paladin and has some eggy aspects, since Colossus Hammer is a 1-mana equipment. It plays, like Cranial Plating, Shadow Spear, Paradise Mantles, a little bit of egginess to go with Pure Steel Paladin. Pure Steel Paladin also allows you to equip Colossus Hammer for free if you have some other equipment lying around. What I like about Halvar is that it allows you to do it with a hammer that's been discarded. So a lot of the time what'll happen, discarded as in off your creature, not discarded from your hand. I realize that's an operative word in Magic. So ideally you play Sigarda's Aid on turn 1 or play a creature on turn 1. And then on turn 2, you play Sigarda's Aid, hammer, you try and attack for, your damage or whatever. You're equipping it to your Memnite or whatever. And, you're trying to attack, and they have a removal spell. They Fatal Push your Memnite. And you're like, oh god, what am I going to do with this hammer? I need 3 equipment to make my Pure Steel Paladin go off. I'm not even playing that many. Well, I have good news. This Halvar will equip it for you. It also is an equipment that's not irrelevant. It keeps the creature alive, so you can kind of grind through removal a little bit.
Also, the fact that both halves it's a 50-50 deck, so sometimes you draw the wrong half, and you're just like, I have all the equipment. I guess I can't do anything. Right. Halvar comes down as a creature that can take advantage of it. Or it's like, oh, I drew all of the creatures, but none of the equipment that these creatures want to have. And Halvar's like, well, I have this equipment for you. Here's some card draw.
You can cast it to cantrip off of Pure Steel Paladin. You can use it to get Metalcraft for Pure Steel Paladin. You can, the fact that you can cast the equipment is not irrelevant in the deck. Although I think Halvar is the more appealing side. The one problem is that the deck is often playing Luris Companion and does not mesh with this. But yep. It's like an option.
Yeah. If you want instead of Luros to have more versatility maybe out of those cards, that helps.
Like the back side kind of protects your creatures in the way that Luris does, and the front side helps you equip random hammers and stuff you have lying around.
I think it's cool they've leaned so much more into double-sided cards. I think it's a pretty fun part of Magic, and I think our good friend Andrew Brown, he always would say the best kind of Magic is when you get to play more Magic. That's why Magic cards, he likes to design cards and be a part of the thought experiment that, are those cards. It makes it better when the game is that way. And so double face cards, I think, are a great part of that. It's the versatility of cards that can cost 1 and cost 4, or, that can do 2 different things. I think it's great. It's better for Magic, I think.
One thing I am excited. So, this is a mid-announcement before we get to the rest of the top 3. We are doing a Commander stream on Monday night at 7:30 where we are going to play with only commanders from this set. And all new brews, the reason I'm reminded, am playing Halvar and the Sword. That is the deck I'll be playing tonight. So check out to the stream, 7:30 p.m. PST on Monday night. But it lives on YouTube forever. So if you missed Monday night and you're watching this on Tuesday, it's there already. You could just, after you're done watching this, go, if you want to just keep listening to us talk at each other, go see what Halvar does in playing mono white commander for the very first time. I've never had a mono white commander deck. This will be the first attempt at this, so it'll be interesting. It was also Maya and Michael's birthday stream. We're doing we're doing mono green, we're doing mono white, we're doing birthdays.
I'm playing Finn. I'm playing Finn the Fangbearer, and I've never built a monocolored commander deck, so there you go.
But yeah, I will say in my haphazard ranking these top 10, since I didn't do it before the cast started, I think I probably rated him a little high, since I don't know if losing Luris is worth it for this here 4-drop in your pretty low to the ground combo deck, but it is a logical progression for the deck. So
Luris could be banned at some point as well.
Well, if Luris gets banned, I think Halvar's stonks are going up.
My number 3 is a spicy one. It's Masked Vandal. 1 and a green, 1/3, Shapeshifter Changeling. When Masked Vandal enters the battlefield, you may exile a creature card from your graveyard. If you do, exile target enchantment or artifact an opponent controls. The reason this is so high for me is 2. 1, it's a Changeling at 2 mana that has an extremely relevant ability. All the other Changelings that are out there that cost this little don't do anything. And it's like I have played many a thing that destroys an artifact or enchantment. This exiles an artifact or enchantment. It does have the cost of getting rid of a creature in your graveyard, but I think that this just there are ways to make that happen for you, and the value on this is very high for how little it costs. And it being a shapeshifter, just lets it play in all the tribal decks on the planet, right? Spirits, elves, getting a artifact and enchantment removal spell that is a creature of the creature type that's relevant is something that I think is worthwhile to pay attention to at that low of a cost.
I think it's a smart pick, honestly. I had kind of missed this card. I think that having the creature in your graveyard at the opportune time is going to sometimes be a little bit of a pain in the butt, like early when you like really need it to happen. But I think that what your point's pretty sound here, which is that like the Rec Sages of the world, all those types of cards that I have played many of in my time, Quasali Pride Mages and all that. They're very good cards. They're usually super helpful. Do a lot often. I guess these days Knight of Autumn is the card in that brand that we're talking about. But I think this is cool. The fact that it costs 2 and it can go in any tribal deck is really strong.
Yeah, I think my problem with this, it almost made my list. I do think the rate is very good. 2 mana changeling that does this is strong because like Reclamation Sage costs 3, Knight of Autumn costs 3. There's 2 strikes against it. I think the main green tribal deck in my mind is Elves, and they are playing
Elves,
Sage over
elves,
it,
spirits,
I
and
think 99%
humans.
of the time. Yeah. So spirits and humans can play this. I guess my strike against it is that I don't think there are very many decks that you want this effect that are also putting a creature in your graveyard. So, like, it does exile Heliod, which is pretty cool, and that deck might have Walking Ballisted one of your creatures away. And then, like, Hammer Time is not really interacting with you that much, so getting rid of one of their equipment is not a big deal.
I think exiling Heliod is pretty relevant, though. I think that's a pretty big game.
It is a pretty big game. You just have to have a creature in your graveyard to do it.
Yeah. We live in a world where exile artifacts and enchantments is good. The question is like, because the other half of like, and is where I'm considering is like, well, and my number 2 card, which I think it sounds like is all of our number 2 card. So part of the thing that I liked about this card is its relationship to my number 2 card and like the power level of that card. And taking advantage of every word that is on this card is relevant there.
Having a creature card in your graveyard is super conditional, in particular for this card, because when at the times that you want this effect and against the decks that you want this effect, I feel like having a creature card in your graveyard is going to be a steep cost. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be like you want this against Jund, where they just like have infinite removal spells, because this effect isn't good against them. Right. It doesn't do anything.
Right.
You want this effect to disrupt people's like combos or their like, disrupt their shenanigans. But decks that are doing shenanigans are probably not putting very many creatures in your graveyard. So that was kind of the strike for me. That and the fact that like elves get Reclamation Sage anyway, so it's not even relevant in like every green tribal deck, since like one of the major ones doesn't.
Gets a better option.
I also probably just had elves on the brain because of all the elves on my list, but
and changeling cards that are basically elves. Yeah. Ben, so what is your number 2?
My number 2 is another Foretell card. Oh. It is Doomscar.
Oh, interesting.
Doomscar is the number 2 card for me. It is white 3, sorcery, destroy all creatures. It has Foretell white 1. Maybe I overvalued this card, but in my mind, the idea that a control deck, and specifically a modern control deck, like the blue-white decks that will sometimes play 2 copies of, the Terminus will be in there sometimes, and sometimes they'll play 1 to 2 copies of Supreme Verdict. But the idea that this card, again, it can sit there, and that you're going to be able to get it for 3 mana in the moment that you want it, that you time it out. You just play it on turn 2. You don't care. Fine. Tap out on turn 2. I play this card face down. It's the same thing as the counterspell, right? And actually, the fact that they both exist, I think, is pretty strong. But the fact that this thing just sits there, and then in the turn that you actually want to use it, because remember, so often in these control matchups, like if this became a defining card, it's about who's going to have the extra counterspell to protect their thing, right? So like, is the tempo deck going to have the counterspell to counter your wrath or whatever? Like the idea that you have this thing sitting there and it's only going to cost you 3 to use it, when traditionally 3 mana wraths, they suck. They aren't good. They are usually not very good. And Terminus is a card that in Modern, at least, you don't have nearly as much control over. It's a great card, but you don't have nearly as much control over when to use it as you would have in like a Legacy. So I think the idea that you can use this card for 3 mana later in the game with the ability still to hold open like a counter spell and a draw spell, whatever, protect your win condition, whatever you're doing, like I think this card's really good. I think this card's going to bear out as one of the better wraths ever printed.
So not on my list. It is scratched off like 4 times, and at one point it was my number 4. At one point it was my number 7. Then it went back to number 3, and then it became my 10, and then I cut it later on.
This is the definition of evaluating Foretell.
Yeah.
This is the one I think that we're all in the same boat of like, how good is Foretell actually? Because if it's really good, this card's going to be defining. It's going to be an iconic card. If it's totally average or bad, then this card, I'm going to have egg on my face. And this is just like, why was this my number 2?
This is the one where I was like, a 5-mana board wipe is bad in Modern, right? That's kind of where I got to. And like the other Foretell cards I picked were ones that are like, you know what, I could cast a fork for red and a red in Modern. Like I could be, the fact that the upside of this is insane and the fact that the downside is fine. The counterspell, I'll cancel something. That's fine. Even the scry effect is an instant 4-mana draw 2 cards and scry 2, I believe, and that is fine. So like this one was like in standard and in arena-based formats, this is the best board wipe, I think, in those. Well, I think they printed Wrath of God in Historic, but in standard, it's the best. It's the best board wipe, and it might even be better than Wrath of God, depending on how this pans out.
Keep in mind the thing about this card that I think people need to remember: when you're the control deck and you're on the draw, and they're playing the super aggro start, you want to have the Wrath, but on turn 4 you Wrath, and they know they have until turn 4. You play this on turn 2, and then they look at you and they go, if I like super overextend and play all of my hand out so I can like totally wreck you, you're 1 turn faster with your Wrath because you can just Wrath their board on your turn 3. That's again why this card I think is so good, is like you have the early game protection. You have like kind of that like Anger of the Gods type of effect. You know, white usually doesn't have access to it that early, that cheap.
Yeah, no, and is Modern a format where you have the ability to take off turn 2 to board wipe on turn 3, and it absolutely could be, right? Like the especially play draw is super relevant, and this card is either very high end, and this comes with the fact that like I wish I knew how Foretell is going to play out of Modern, and like I can't say that right now. And this card has the swingiest thing, as you said, where at 5 mana, if Foretell is not good, the backside of this is not good. But if Foretell is good, the front side of this is insane. A 3-mana board wipe is a very, very, very good card. And it depends on, where the Modern metagame is and how punishing you can be punished by playing a 2-drop board wipe. Like, I guess the other hand is, out of the sideboard, this card is probably amazing. I will give credit towards, like, one of the best sideboard cards out of this format. And when I say that, in the sense that, like, in a main deck, it's not great because you can't tap out on turn 2 as a control deck in Modern for this card, not knowing what your opponent is doing, and or even having like a loose understanding, because you could play this and then they infect kill you, or that they like get the things in play that you needed to counter and now you can't, and now you're wrecked. They ad nause you to death, and so yeah, I don't know. I agree that this card could be the best card in the set, and I also agree that it might be not played at all.
I think it is the best Foretell card, but I also think that it is the Foretell card that probably suffers the most from being forecasted, because Wraths are like pretty easy to play around if your opponent sees it coming. So if this is the only Foretell card that gets played in Modern, it's a lot worse. Even if it's one of 2, maybe one of 3, like if you're blue-white control and you're playing like the counterspell, the card draw, and this, firstly, I think your deck's really clunky. But even if you're doing that, playing this, like your opponent is like, okay, they probably have a Wrath. I'm going to play around it. I'm going to like, take my turn 3 to not develop the board. I'm going to draw cards, or I'm going to, burn their face, or I'm going to play a Planeswalker or a Heliod or something, or I'm going to hold up mana for a counterspell, or, I get that this card, you take a turn off and it allows you to be like very mana efficient in the future, but your opponent like really does get to play around it, especially in Modern, where there's probably not a ton of Foretell cards that are playable. I also, like I said, am just kind of low on Foretell, but I do think this is the best Foretell card, and it was hovering close to my honorable mentions, because I think that being the best Foretell card is definitely something, and 3-mana Wrath is very appealing. Is a very appealing Christmas land, right? But I don't know. I don't. It doesn't get there for me.
So we talked Doomscar. So. Michael, did you already reveal your number 2?
No, my number 2 is Bind the Monster.
You put Bind the Monster as your number 2? Is it the blue one?
Yeah, card's dope. All right. It's a 1-mana aura enchant creature. When Bind the Monster enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. It deals damage to you equal to its power. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's tap step. This is a 1-mana removal spell. Now, obviously, taking damage is relevant, because the times when you most want a 1-mana removal spell, your life total may be in jeopardy. And it does not like remove combo creatures or whatever. But I just feel like this has got to be a card that shows up in people's sideboards forever. Like either you don't have access to black, or you don't want to give your opponent a land with Path to Exile, or you're an aggressive deck like Merfolk or something, but you don't want to splash white because you don't want to like ruin your mana base and you want to play Mutavaults or whatever. Or maybe you're not Merfolk, maybe it's like a Death Shadow deck or something, and taking the damage is kind of an upside. Now, obviously in Death Shadow decks you have access to Fatal Push, which is a much better card in almost every situation. But this card feels so efficient to me, and yes, taking damage is a big downside, and I don't think like control decks are ever going to be interested in this really. But one mana removal spell in mono blue, it feels like it's got to be something for me.
I looked at it. And I seriously thought about it because
the rate is really so good.
Yeah, no, agreed. I really thought about it. I guess let me put it to you this way. So let's say that you're using this somewhere sort of early in the game ish, right? Like let's say that's a 3-power creature. Let's pretend that like you're tapping down and getting rid of something with 3 power. And you play this for 1 blue. So you take 3 damage. How different is that really from like pungifying or rapid hybridization one of their creatures at instant speed? It's different, obviously. Like
I know you're a big rapid hybridization fan, but
Merfolk can't get around a 3/3.
My point wasn't to say that it's not to necessarily compare the cards, because I do understand the value of having a creature off the table. I think my point is that there's a downside to that card, that it is a 1 mana blue destroy target creature that does exist, and it's existed this whole time. Mono blue decks had a way to destroy something for 1 mana at instant speed. It's never even remotely, it's never been like a thing people try. It's not even the equivalent of like, oh, maybe this is better than we think. It's like
turning their 3-power creature into a different 3-power creature does not appeal to me. Taking 3 damage once to make their 3-power creature basically dead does appeal to me. Also, you can use this on like mana elves. Like if your opponent goes turn 1 Arbor Elf and you're just like, got him. I don't want to pongify my opponent's Arbor Elf on turn 1. That sounds terrible.
I think this card's really good. I think that like my issue with it is the decks that it is best in are decks that are not that good in Modern anymore.
Yeah, be that as it may, I think this is a card that is legal in Modern and will always be getting better. Even like the blue-red prowess decks, like it triggers prowess, it kills a creature for 1 mana no matter how big it is.
Sure.
Like
that's true, and it clears the path for your Swift Spear or whatever else.
Yeah,
like, to just make sure
like this gets rid of an Uro or a Primeval Titan at great cost to your life total, but it's not like the Uro deck or the Primeval Titan is putting pressure on your life total. You just need to kill them dead. You need to tap down their blocker, and you need to attack with your Soulscar mages. And
it is a really good way to get rid of Uro, actually.
It does the job. If your opponent has Uro in play, you do need to kill them. And, this is a way to maybe get it done.
Yeah, I think this card's good. I think it's arguably a miss to not have it in the top 10. Honestly, I think this set is like a bunch of versatile cards that it was hard to eliminate stuff, and I like that this card made it.
Just 1 mana is too efficient for me. I get that maybe, yes, there isn't a good deck for it right now, or the metagame is weirdly positioned, but it's just a 1 mana blue removal spell.
Yeah, I guess like Vendetta has been legal. Vendetta has been legal in the format since its inception and has seen very little play. And the question
when you have access to black, you just play Fatal Push, or you play.
I'm saying since the beginning, right? Like early on.
I think there's some truth to it. It definitely crossed my mind when I read it, but I just don't think
people did ask about it. I
don't know.
I think it'll see more play than Orvar, if that makes
there's only. So Alex, I believe you and I have
think it will see more play than most of the cards on my list. That's why it's number 2.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I believe you and I have the same number 2. I think we have. It seems that you have alluded to it. I believe we both have Pyre of Heroes.
Yeah, Pyre of Heroes is my number 2 as well.
Oh, yeah. Honorable mention. Sorry, fellas.
Oh, man. This card is Birthing Pod, but you have to be playing tribal cards. Now, the thing about those tribal cards is that they also printed a bunch of changelings. Of those changelings, there's one that exiles an artifact or enchantment if you have a creature in play, conveniently put there by your Pyre. You also have the ability to get stuff like Moretta of the Frost, which copies a thing for 5 mana. And pretty much they printed, at this point, there is a, versatile enough changeling at every converted mana cost that you can use it to chain up to the combo pieces you need to go infinite and play Birthing Pod. Add that to the fact that there are decks now that I think I would play Birthing Pod in that are tribal decks that aren't just on the combo, and the fact that this leans you in those directions is spicy to me. And I love this card a great deal. I'm glad Birthing Pod is back on the menu, boys, and I'll be eating at the Birthing Pod buffet.
I don't know that much to say about this card. I feel like it was when it was spoiled, a lot of conversation had. For me, it's more of just the whole. Go ahead.
I'm gonna read it. I forgot that we haven't read it out loud.
Okay. Yep.
Pyre of Heroes is 2 mana for an artifact. 2 tap, sacrifice a creature. Search your library for a creature card that shares a creature type with the sacrificed creature and has converted mana cost equal to 1 plus that creature's converted mana cost. Put that card onto the battlefield. Then shuffle your library. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So Birthing Pod. But you have to have a creature of a similar type. It's 2 mana instead of 3 mana and Phyrexian mana, but then it is 2 mana to tap it and use it versus 1 mana and a Phyrexian mana. Okay, Ben, I apologize. Continue with what you're saying.
No, all I was just saying is when this card was spoiled, like we definitely talked about it internally. We all talked about it. It is very, very, very reminiscent of Birthing Pod. Obviously, it's cheaper on some level. It's cool. It definitely will have combos that work with it. There's no question that this will be a combo enabler. I think the reason it's so high for me is that even without knowing what it does, I just remember like Birthing Pod had so many decks that it fit into and did so much work that they had to ban it because like it just wasn't going to get any better. It's a little strange to me that they would print this. I guess the limiting factor of the tribal stuff means that the work you'll have to do will be it'll be a little narrower, so it'll just be a little bit harder to make this work. Mm-hmm. But it does just feel like this is like baby Birthing Pod, and I just know how powerful that can be. It's better than all of the other pseudo versions of Birthing Pod that we've had, or the spells that imitate it. Right. This is Birthing Pod if you can do it right.
It'll be at a power level that's I feel like closer to what like the Kiki Pod decks were doing, where they were a little bit more glass cannony and the chains are a little less clean. Kiki Pod took advantage of that by like if they got the right 3 cards in play, they automatically won due to the chain going up the right way. Where this deck I think is gonna win the way that the old Birthing Pod decks won, which is just like extreme value from the cards you're playing. And like in zombie decks, for instance, you could just play a zombie deck that did this. That was a gray merchant deck that's just sacrificing stuff that is good enough that you get there. Or you can use changelings to do something a little bit more glass cannony, but like find your way up the chain, but every other card is a changeling or like is just accidentally the creature type you need.
The power of Kiki Pod was if you had any 1-drop, any 2-drop, and a Birthing Pod in play, you could win.
Correct.
And I think you probably cannot do that with this, especially because even if you are able to like pod your 2-drop changeling into Deceiver Exarch to untap it, and then pod your Deceiver Exarch into Orvar, cloning another Deceiver Exarch. I don't know. Even if you're doing that, Pyre each time you untap it is 2 mana instead of 1 and 2 life, which I think is super relevant if you're like comboing. I think Goblins is cool. I think Zombies is cool because they are like more aristocrat-y based, but I still just think like hoping to like outvalue your opponent who is playing Uro with Birthing Pod is a much taller order nowadays. And I also think like the fact that you do lose a lot of combo potential by missing out on, these pod change that that aren't the same creature type.
That is the Kiki Pod value engine, right? Like that, but Kiki Pod was the worst Birthing Pod deck, right? Of the 2 key ones during Birthing Pod's era, Kiki Pod was the one that was the glass cannon that wasn't as good. The one that was good was the one that was just using it, and at its final moments, the best version of Birthing Pod was the one that wasn't even using it to combo. It was just getting Siege Rhinos and just like how much value you can get off of each card you're sacking. And I think we're at a point where some of these tribes can just like in the Treasure Cruise era, which is arguably one of the most high-powered versions of Modern, they played 0 combo in pod decks. It was all hate bears and Siege Rhino was the top end, right? And maybe there's a better value engine, but like the fact that goblins
township, it was like township decks with like just like birds,
right? Siege Rhino, and you played a bunch of random hate bears that you were able to tutor for. And the fact that like humans can do that and goblins can do that, and like you can go infinite in the goblin deck, right? Like you can just get goblin Shooty McMahon and the 2-drop guy that puts a +1/+1 counter whenever a goblin enters play.
Grumgully and Redcap.
Yeah, and then you play and the
you
one.
You can also go infinite with Snoop with Kiki on top of your library.
Like you can do like that deck is a combo deck that this fits in, and a lot of those things are valuable enough to like you can sacrifice them for funsies. And I think like That's true of zombies as well. That's true of, like, there's enough decks out there. Like, I think zombies plays what our old Birthing Pod does, right? Like, it plays a bunch of weird 1-drops and 2-drops, and eventually you can pot up to Gray Merchant for value, but like, as they're dealing with you doing that, you're getting beat down by 3 X's and 4 X's and 2 X's that you have to also deal with.
I guess you can pot a 1-drop goblin into Snoop, and then you can pot a 2-drop goblin into Harbinger, and then you win.
Yeah.
Right. That's cute. I don't know. It didn't quite get there for me, but I definitely see where the power level lies. And I love the idea of like zombies or goblins or like one of the aristocratic tribes with it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think outvaluing your opponent is a lot harder now than it was back then.
I don't know if
you had to fight a lot harder for your value back then.
I mean, your value is very powerful now. I mean, I think Uro is like a net negative to everything. So number 1, Mr. Tybalt.
Yeah, same.
/ Valky. You missed Freebooter, which I think is the best version of this effect in the format, Ben.
That's the modern. That's the modern. That's the modern version that everybody.
Well, okay, so I think that's a good comparison where like Freebooter, Brain Maggot, they're like all at least on the fringe of playable in many a format. Freebooter is the best because it has a relevant creature type.
And but also like up to this point, this effect has done well when it had a relevant creature type. Sculler was an artifact. This is a zombie. And then this is a human. I think that the benefit on top of this is it does this and kind of draws you a card. Right now, none of those have ever drawn you a card that you got a threat. This is also a 2/1. And like, for instance, Brain Maggot is a 1/1. Freebooter is a 1/2.
Mesmeric Fiend is a 1/1. Sculler is a 2/2, but it also
is gold.
Is gold, yeah.
Black-white, yeah.
So the fact that this is a card that comes in and without any of the backside, a like relatively modern, adjacent to modern playable, if not blatantly modern playable, if you like, there are enough modern playable versions of this card that you can say doesn't have a better creature type. Though legendary is a creature type that is relevant. Like there are like you can play this and Mox Amber all day long.
Yeah, there's a bunch of cards that reference legendary in the set too.
Could have tribal mechanics. It is a 2/1 versus a 1/1 or the other ones. And the other ability, which is Uro Theft or whatever you want to do with it, on its own is great. The other piece of it that I'm most excited by is that Bloodbraid Elf casts the 7-drop side, which is insane.
Very powerful.
Yeah, and like this Planeswalker, you are extremely likely to win if you get it in play. I mean, it's basically Karn liberated.
And the fact that like it has the other mode of getting multiples isn't bad because you can transform Tybalt into the second thing, and it no longer has the ability, but it's not Tybalt anymore. So the second one can then come into play, and you can use it, or you can just play the Planeswalker half late game, as Ben said. This is good at most points of the game. There's like one moment it's super awkward, which is like turn 6, but otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it also like if the first one turns into a copy of a creature, the second one can just be a Valky because it is no longer a Valky. But yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of the time now Freebooter. So the trick is like you don't need a relevant creature type. What you need to do is you need to come in and you need to be relevant later in the game. Like the reason nobody plays Brain Maggot is because you play it and it's a 1/1 and it's just a 1/1 forever. It doesn't do anything. Like Freebooter is not going to stay at 1/1. It's going to get bigger off Thalia's Lieutenant.
And it has evasion. It's flying. Like being a flyer.
Yeah, and it's flying. So this guy is a 2/1. So it's like, beats them up to begin with. But also it becomes the creature you stole, which is theoretically bigger than a 2/1. And then, you get to do stuff. Now, maybe you're not an Uro, but maybe you're just like a random, well, even just like, a Monastery Swift Spear or something, or like, that's better than a 2/1 a lot of the time. So
it's an inexpensive activation. If it's an inexpensive creature, I mean, even if it's just like a 1-drop or a 2-drop out of their hand, it doesn't cost you much. It loses the ability, as you said, but still very relevant.
I would say that the biggest strike against this card is the most common thing to do with Freebooter is you look at their hand, you take their removal spell.
Right.
Now they can't kill your Freebooter. A lot of the time, this guy, you're going to look at their hand, you're going to be like, ha ha ha, I'll take their Uro. And then you're like, wait, they have a Fatal Push. And then they Fatal Push your Valky.
Does it have to take a creature, or can it can take any card? It's just if you take a creature, you can copy it.
It must take a creature.
It must take a creature. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's still my number one because it just fits so neatly in a metagame full of Uro,
Right.
and like the Cascade into Tybalt is just like a super duper game winning play out of Jund. And also, like, if you're playing this, I think that you are definitely playing like Thoughtseizes or Inquisitions or whatever, which is what you're doing in Jund. So like, if you are Thoughtseizing, you're seeing their hand, you know if they have targets for this, and then you're taking their removal spell. Then you follow it up with this to take their Uro, and now they have nothing, right? Like you've taken theoretically their two best cards and you've become one of them. You know, if you play Thoughtseize and you see two removal spells, then maybe you don't play this on turn 2. You play Ren in 6, or you play, Tarmogoyf or whatever.
Right. And yeah, I think like that information is also valuable. On the other hand, those other cards were able to get, a lot of them will only get instant sorcery. So this on the back end is Essence Scatter versus Negate. But there are meta games where both are super relevant, and this is better than Essence Scatter by a lot, I think. I'm hyped on this card. I think it's really cool. And then obviously Tybalt on top. Yeah. I think my top 2 I'm pretty confident in. I think all the other ones we're going to see how this works.
Can't believe nobody else had Bind.
Can't believe you're hating on Pyre of Heroes so hard.
I'm not hating on it. It's in my honorable mentions.
As far as honorable mentions go, I think we're running really, really late for this episode. So I think what we will do is save those for another time, unless people want to just like run through and say the name of their honorable mentions.
We talked about most of mine. We talked about Goldspan Dragon. We talked about Magda. I had Provoke the Trolls just because the name is so good. And then also I had Cosmos Charger on my list. Which I think is probably my favorite piece of art in the whole set. I think that card's really cool. Mm-hmm. Cosmos Charger. I'm trying to remember exactly what it does. Blue 3/3/3 flash flying horse spirit. Foretelling cards from your hand cost 1 less and can be done on any player's turn. And then itself it foretells for blue 2. I just think this card's really sweet. The art's fantastic, and like I love I'll always love like a 3/3 flash flying for 4. Like I'll always be a fan of that type of card just because I think it plays well. But then the idea that if Foretell was a good thing, it would make all your Foretell things cheaper. I just thought it was cool. So I put it on the honorable mentions.
As a Foretell fan, it makes sense.
Yes. I have some of my honorable mentions. I have Elven Ambush, which is the make an elf for every elf you control at instant speed, which I felt is like a cute way of getting just a lot of elves into play for not a lot. I had Moretti of the Frost, which is the 5-mana legendary shapeshifter that enters the battlefield as a clone of something, but bigger, and just like on that pod train I was talking about. And I don't think it would be good anywhere else necessarily. I did have In Search of Greatness, Ben. Don't worry. And I did also have Maskwood Nexus, which I think I mostly didn't include because I felt it was like redundant with Pyre of Heroes.
I have Pyre, Birgi, Maskwood Nexus, which we've all talked about. I have Weathered Runestone, which is 2 mana Grafdigger's Cage, but it affects non-land permanents instead of just creatures. It is a card that I would pick up for your sideboards because it's just an uncommon and it's super cheap, and you never know if there's going to be some War of Invention deck that takes off and you're going to want it or whatever. Yep. Or they print some crazy artifact reanimator card that you're going to need this against. Also, you can play it under a Chalice in a prison deck. So if you're playing both Chalice and you want a Grafdigger's Cage, you can play this instead. Quakebringer is my other honorable mention. This is my Foretell card. 3 red 5/4. Your opponents can't gain life. Is a giant berserker. Your opponents can't gain life. At the beginning of your upkeep, Quakebringer deals 2 damage to each opponent. This ability triggers only if Quakebringer is on the battlefield or if it's in your graveyard and you control a giant. I don't think there are enough giants to make this work, which is the reason it's just an honorable mention. But I have to say that this card is so cool with Kroxa because they both, like, if you're just dumping cards in your graveyard via Cathartic Reunion or Dredge or whatever, you can super easily get Kroxa back, and then Kroxa turns this card on, and now you're doming them for extra, and Kroxa's killing them. The one thing is it's a little win more because Kroxa probably kills them if it's in play. But given more giants, I think the fact that this does something for free out of your graveyard is very cool.
The last card I had was Mystic Reflection, which was 1 in a blue instant Foretell card. Just speaking of Foretell cards, and you can foretell for blue. Choose target non-legendary creature. The next time 1 or more creatures or planeswalkers enter the battlefield this turn, they enter as copies of the chosen creature. There are cool shenanigan get copies of the thing you have with tokens or whatever things you can do, or like with the creature you have you wanted to. But like the other one is just like removal, right? Like, if they play a Kroxa or they play an Uro, you can kind of cast this in response, and now they're a 1/1 token or a trash creature that doesn't matter. And and I think that's cute. And it
was on my list, but I ended up cutting it. The last card I had mentioned was just because I think this card's cool. Vega the Watcher, the bird spirit, blue white 1 for a 2/2 flying legendary bird spirit. What's cool about this card is that it says flying whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand draw card. I just like that it interacts with lots of other things, like whether it's like rebound or whether it's like suspend or various other things that like spells you cast, anything from your graveyard. If you put this card with like Dreadhorde Arcanist, there's so many different instances.
For your library.
Yeah, so I think that a 2/2 flying creature for 3 is really cool, and it's legendary. So you could build a commander deck around this card also, which is kind of fun. I think this card is pretty cool.
I feel like Ben should build the Foretell deck for next week instead of the Infect deck. He seems so hyped on it.
It's true. He loves Foretell cards, and he loves Vega or whatever that is.
I've mentioned Commander like 6 times on this podcast, and you guys haven't mentioned it once.
We're staying true to the theme. This is Modern Top 10. Look, if we want to talk about Commander, that's a whole other episode.
Yeah.
At least. Things are a lot more playable in Commander than they are in Modern, let me tell you.
That is true.
Yeah, Alex, you should be correcting me. You should be correcting me. You should be like, this is a Modern podcast, Ben. Nobody cares about Commander. That was me,
I'm just happy that you like playing Magic, Ben. That's all I'm here for. Your happiness in Magic playing and to murder you in a game of Commander. So that is it for today's episode. We've gone long, so thank you so much. Thank you, Marshall. Thank you, patrons. Once again, thank you, David Sales Talk. Welcome to the Honorable House of Modern. If you are watching this on YouTube, please like below. Make sure to check out our Commander stream tonight. It's at 7:30 p.m. PST. If you missed it, it's on twitch.tv/Kess Wiley or on YouTube. If you did miss it, it lives on YouTube forever, so you can watch that right now. We're doing a bunch of Kaldheim Commander. We're trying on playing Halvar. We don't know what Michael and Marshall are doing yet. Ben sounds like he's playing the Infect guy, but we might convince him to play Foretell between now and then. He'll probably try building his deck on Monday morning anyways, because he's a procrastinator. Make sure to check out our Patreon. It's the reason we can do this. If you like this content, you get a whole week early. So literally the day after this episode releases on YouTube, the next episode of the podcast is on as a raw feed on our Patreon. So check that out in video form, and please like and subscribe and hit the bell. Hit that bell, baby. And you can follow me at Kess Wiley everywhere. You can follow Michael.
I'm at Dudard, DUDARDD on Twitter.
And you can follow Ben.
You guys can find me at Ben Bateman Media, all of the different places. And we've just started doing WandaVision reviews over on Action Industries, one of the channels that I do over with Andrew Guy. So on Fridays, you guys can check those out. They come out if you guys are interested. We do that. So check out WandaVision over at Action Industries. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody. You're the best. And we'll talk to you literally now, like daily. Just check out YouTube. There's content coming there all the time. And on Twitter. Bye.
This has been a production of Time Traveler Media, sending podcasts into the future.